Alrighty, welcome back to Office Hours, the Sean Mabry, the thing I still haven't really named. I just kind of defaulted to Office Hours because why not? Um, Here's what I want to do today. I want to actually outline my next Substack article here right now, and I've been trying to figure out the live setup that makes the most sense for this because um, I love being up in chat. I love being able to respond to questions as they come in live. I mean, that's the whole point of doing things live. Um, so what I need to figure out is how I can see my screen or my this other tab, but still be able to see chat. See, this doesn't work because I can't see the chat. I'm either having to jump on the chat separately or come over here and see the doc, right? So I don't love that. What I'm wondering is there a way that Substack will allow me to? Yes, good. I want to be able to see the chat while I'm sharing, while I'm screen sharing. So here's a kind of wacky idea. Let's do it this way. Okay. This I think will actually work. It's clunky, but that's fine. Because at least this way I can see the chat while I'm going. I'm a little teeny tiny. I like to. It's funny. I know this is not the best etiquette for live calls, but I actually like being able to see my own face while I'm on a call because otherwise I get very paranoid about like being out of frame or in some weird spot. So I like being able to see myself somewhere. And like right now, I'm just this like tiny little blip next to the screen I'm sharing. But that'll have to do because what I want to talk about today, and I'll just stay in pure yap mode for a second before I dive into this. So first off, I want to give a shout out to one of my new Substack friends, Hag Confidential. First off, great name. We love Hags around here. We love hags in general. We love witches. We love other magical beings. And she and I went back and forth a little bit this week on her articles, on my articles. I've been giving her some love because she's a fantastic memoirist. Like just her essays over on, again, that's Hag Confidential, are fantastic. She does really beautiful essays on just different experiences and parts of her life. Sometimes it's, kind of recent in the moment stuff. Sometimes she's going much further back. And so far, everything I've read, I thoroughly enjoy. She's got everything you want in memoir, right? Great dialogue, great scene setting, beautiful sensory details, and crucially, very clear narrative flow. Like it's with everything I've read from her so far, it's very clear what the point of the story is. And we're going to unpack that a little bit because the thing I bump into a lot when I start talking about like the point of your story is people start getting like, well, I don't want to force my story to say one thing. I don't want to like box it in. And it's like, look, I get that. And in fact, that was one of the biggest things I had to learn when I was first working with my mentor is in fiction, and this does actually apply to essays too. So we'll get into that as I go through the outlining process. But in fiction, the best storytellers, it's not that they set out with a single point in the sense of a lesson, right? Because that's how you end up being preachy. Like if the entire story only exists to drive home the one thing you want to say, that's probably not a very good story. It's going to be very flat. It's going to be ultimately you're going to have characters that are not realistic as complex human beings because they're just there to be mouthpieces for either the point you want to argue or the straw man of the point you want to attack, right? And that's exactly what happens with preachy writing. The real goal is to find what he would always call the central question. So every story has a central question that has something to do with human life, right? Like something that we all wrestle with in our own ways. And uh ideally that question should be something that is very universal, right? Like for example, bad central question would be or maybe not bad, but like, um inefficient, um minimally useful would be something um like how how do you defeat an opponent in single combat, right? Like that's not, even though there's plenty of stories about that. There's plenty of stories about people fighting. Um, that's that's not really the question, right? And if you think of like there are many stories that feature like a pivotal moment, like David and Goliath, right? Like one of the most famous stories of two people fighting, right? Um, that one you could say, well, maybe the central question is like, how do you defeat an opponent of greater strength? Ah, now we're getting somewhere, because that is something that is a universal experience. We all have moments where we are up against seemingly impossible odds. And what do you do then, right? That's part of why David and Goliath is, I mean, it's like a shorthand, right? Like it's, that story is so timeless and so resonant because that central metaphor is something we all can identify with. And crucially, the the story itself, it's not saying, I mean, it does ultimately land on an answer, but it begins from a place of tension, right? It begins with David standing across the field from Goliath, right? And hearing that the everyone's talking about like how he's like impossible to defeat and whatnot. And that tension is the thing that is ultimately resolved by David stepping forward with his 5 stones and leaning on his faith in God to defeat Goliath. So even if you have some idea of where the story is going to end or where the essay is going to end, and you know that this is how I have responded to this question, that's great. It's still worth framing it as a question in the beginning so that you don't over determine it from the beginning and lock yourself in, right? Which I ironically is exactly the thing that um that winds up happening if you don't plan ahead, right? Is people get stuck on one idea or one thing, and they part of why they end up abandoning their work is that they can't see the full possibility space and they don't know how to choose the next thing to say. So let's we're going to dive into my essay in a second. The reason why I brought up See How Confidential, I want to give her a shout out, is another big thing about like growing an audience anywhere is we started going back and forth, just chatting, right? Just interacting. And she said, it was actually on the last article I put out, the one about my dad and me fighting over the parking brake. Um, there's a line in there where I mention how I have autism. I'm mild autism. They back then it was actually called Asperger's. That no longer exists. Now it's called mild autism. Um, but I I have it, and I very likely got it from him. Right? I don't. He never got an official diagnosis, but as he was learning about it through my diagnosis, that's when he started connecting some dots and realized like, oh, I have it too. Right? So he's sort of a self-diagnoser, as a lot of people are later in life. And that's something that's always been sort of a through line in our relationship, is that he is both very like understanding of it, and actually um has always, I mean, like these days, I mean, that's one of the things that's so interesting about this to me, right? And might figure into the essay, is that over the course of my lifetime, the whole conversation around autism has gone through so many different permutations, right? Like when I was a kid, there was people knew about autism, but there was a lot. They basically, if people were thinking about it at all, they were thinking of it in terms of the more extreme cases, right? Like they were thinking of it in terms of um, Down syndrome, which is like related, but not exactly the same thing. Or they were thinking of like Rain Man, right? Like the very very extreme examples of autism. Um, and one of the interesting things for me growing up was that when I would tell other kids about my condition, a lot of times they didn't believe me. They were like, "Well, what are you talking about? You seem normal, right?" Um, and I would try to explain to them like, "Well, I'm not all the way that, but I'm not that, right?" Like, it's just I don't even think anyone was using the term autism spectrum yet. I'm not sure exactly when that term appeared, but that came later, right? Like I didn't have that as a kid, but what I did have was, I mean, again, we had Asperger's back then. I at least had some language and some understanding for what I was going through, and that was very very helpful, right? And it's something that I think I benefited from. I know I benefited from enormously because my dad didn't have that growing up, and we've talked about how like there are certain things in his childhood that were difficult to explain or get across to other people because they didn't really have the language for it yet, right? They really did like um certainly he never got a diagnosis for it, right? And so the thing that so all that, right? Like just the two-line mention of the autism in that article, see how confidential latched onto that and said, "Hey, that's interesting. Can you say more about that?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that's probably actually a future article idea." Um, and then we on another separate thread, we were talking about like how in a book you can go deeper and say things that you like even in a Substack article, right? You can't quite get there, not because um, well, ultimately because there are things that are so nuanced and require such a depth of trust between the writer and the reader that it doesn't make sense in a short or even quote unquote long form for the internet, right? Like in the space of a single article or a single post or whatever, you just can't get down to that level of nuance where it is helpful to actually discuss that topic in full. And um, there's a lot of things in my book that are a good example of that, right? Like when it comes to the nitty gritty of addiction and being a survivor of addiction and a lot of things we went through. If I was not careful in how I present that stuff publicly, like there are moments there where if I dropped it into a Substack article without context, if I just dumped that moment on full display for the public, people would misunderstand it. And not through any fault of theirs, but because how could they understand that thing without context, right? If I'm just dumping this highly traumatic, difficult moment without the context of everything that came before and after, of course they're going to misunderstand it. And of course they're going to emotionally react and lash out. And so this is one of the big things I think about a lot in terms of like vulnerable storytelling is that for one, yes, I'm a huge believer in it. I think it's more and more important in the age of AI for people to come forward and tell their stories and be vulnerable publicly. But there's a line, right? And there's respecting the format and understanding what you're asking of your audience at each step, right? Like here I am talking around certain topics and acknowledging them and giving certain things away, but I'm not just wildly trauma dumping every thought in my head or every feeling I've ever had about these topics because that would what would that actually do for you, right? Like um that might allow us to trauma bond parasocially, but that's not what I want. What I want is to empower other people to tell their stories in a thoughtful and responsible way. And the first step is telling my story in a thoughtful and responsible way, which all this goes back to the idea of outlining. So one of the things that I started doing as soon as I like locked in on Substack and I was like, all right, I'm serious, I'm doing this, I'm gonna make Substack my thing. Um, I just started keeping a running list of article ideas. And really, it was like, I think the first time I opened that Google Doc, it was I had like 5 ideas, and I'm like, all right, that's cool. I'm publishing an article once a week, or yeah, once a week. So that's good for another month and change. And then steadily, just like, and this is what happens, right? Once you start listening things, you start noticing things more and more. Just as I like was going about my day, I'd memory would come up or a topic in conversation. I'd be like, oh, that'd be a good Substack article. So I'd go and add it to the list. So I got up to like eight future topics to come. And then thanks to CHAG, yesterday I got up to 10, right? Just from that one conversation. And everything on that list, I don't have a firm plan or preference for like when they come up. These are just things that I know I want to talk about at some point. Which to me is actually perfect, right? Like I find that it is, we all love our spontaneity as creatives. I find it's way more helpful to keep a loose rolling list than to like try to rigidly plan out um, topics, super far in advance. That might change too over time as I get deeper into the process and I actually realize like, oh, it would make sense to plan some of these things in advance. But ultimately, the thing I needed to get moving is a list of ideas I can grab from when it is time to write the next article, right? Because the most important thing, the first thing is I made the commitment that every week, come hell or high water, I will put out a new Substack article. And so now, knowing that that's the case and knowing where to find the topics, that's just becoming easier and easier with every passing week. So, um, so knowing that I have this rolling list of topics and that I can kind of take any topic at any time, I decided, hey, I have a member of my audience. This is someone I just met on Substack, right? Like me and CHAG, like no interaction in the outside world. And the fact that she's already like asking for Substack topics, that's awesome. That's fantastic. Like that is something that I think a lot of people overlook when it comes to building an online presence, is that as soon as you have people asking for a certain type of content or like making requests of your work, honor that, right? Like, because that's the virtuous cycle that every successful public brand basically survives on, is and thrives on, is when you have that virtuous cycle of, you put something out that's what you truly deeply believe and something that's important to you. The audience response says, hey, I love this, and also I'm looking for XYZ, right? Can you expand on this? I have this other question. Yes, absolutely. Here's my answer to that. And then so on and so forth. Over time, that's a deeper and deeper bond between creator and audience, more opportunities to help and serve them, right? So I was like, hey, I'm not, I'm committed to getting all these topics. I'm not married to the order. Boom, we're moving up those 2 new topics that are requested to the top of the list because um, someone's waiting for them, right? And that's why I decided, like, okay, between those 2 topics, I think the most interesting of the 2 is the autism angle, because the one about like the walled garden thing, that's what I was talking about with like being able to go deeper into the book. That is going to be its own article. But that's a little bit more meta, right? That's a little bit more me talking about the craft, which, like I've been saying, I'm happy to include those too. And I love including those. But ultimately, like one of the things I am focused on in this phase of my growth on Substack is I actually want to prioritize more of the personal storytelling versus the like how-to stuff, which even then it's not really going to be how-to, it's more like reflection and big idea stuff. But I don't want to fall into the trap of just writing about Substack on Substack, which is funny actually, because even that is its own future article. But um, ultimately, the goal here is not to like I want to break people out of this thinking of like serving the content machine, right? Like that's not the goal here. The goal is to get people to share their real story and tell the whole story about why they're here, what they're here to do, they're here to serve. And that requires starting from within, right? And mastering the craft and learning the tools and learning the platform to get that message out effectively. like that all matters too. But I never want to get caught in the trap of, well, let me just talk about the platform or talk about the act of writing because that's what is nearest to hand, right? Um, so even though I am kind of doing that now, um, that won't be the only thing, right? I never want to make that the only thing. So let me pop this open. Good. Hang on. Screen share, screen share. All righty. So working title for this is sharing autism with my dad, but maybe not my son, right? And uh the central question, and literally this is like all I have right now, right? So this is why I wanted to like keep this as fresh as possible, right? I mean, I've got the ideas bouncing around in my head, but you guys are really seeing from word jump how I go from like this much content to article to outline to full article, right? So um that's my working title. Central question, like I said, the reason why I'm wrapping my son into this is the thing that I already called out in that previous article, and the thing that is most top of mind for me right now, and I think will honestly be most relevant to others at the moment, is not so much talking about my own experience with autism, although I'm happy to do that and probably will at some point in another article, but to more to track the thread of here's how my dad experienced it, here's how I experienced it, and then here's how my son might experience it. We're going to come to that word might in a second because it's really important to the story. But really, my central question here is not so much about autism itself. Because again, like I was saying at the top, if I just made this an autism article, that would be relevant to other people with autism and other people who are in community with folks on the spectrum. But I actually think there's an opportunity to say something universal here, and that's where the central question comes in. Because and look, I'm still talking about autism, right? I'm not trying to like hide that or water that down. But in terms of what are people getting when they get into this article, I want them to see that what I am wrestling with here is not simply a matter of being born on the spectrum, right? Like because I think that's the thing that runs the risk of either being preachy or of being niche in the wrong way, right? Like I don't I don't want to make this a matter of like, oh, here's what makes me different from everyone else because of my condition. It's like, no, 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 no. This is a window into some like my life and um my neurology. I'm offering up as a window into something that we all experience, right? Obviously, it's going to look different because of the window that I present, but that doesn't mean that this is something you, the reader, can't access, even if you are neurotypical, even if you have never been around someone on the spectrum, right? Or you've never been that close with anyone on the spectrum, this can still be relevant to you because of this central question at the heart of it. So I think the central question for me is it's something around like why, like what do you do with changes across generations, right? Like this is something that is because one of the so in fact, you know what? The fact that I'm like still kind of like circling the central question, that's fine, right? Um, and this is the beauty of outlining is I don't have like even though like by the end of the session, I want the central question pinned down. But because I am in this like sort of brainstorming mode, I'm not going to force myself to get the central question down before writing anything else, right? Like the rest of these notes are going to help me hone it by putting down like, okay, what I call the core beats, right? So, and this is a term from screenwriting, right? Like in screenwriting, you've got the beats of a scene, which are like the individual moments ultimately where something changes, right? Where um, a character has a realization or they make a new decision, right? Like all the things that are sort of like bring life and energy to the scene. Those are the individual beats of the story, right? So an essay ideally should work the same way. Um, and so one of the core beats is not wanting to play catch with my dad, right? This was a big thing for us growing up. Like my dad would want to go play catch with me in the front yard as like a little kid, right? As like, probably around 8 years old. Um, and all I wanted to do was play Game Boy, right? I wanted to go, play Game Boy or Legos, right? Depending on my age. And um, and I would sometimes like kind of like half-heartedly go and play catch with him for a bit, but my heart was not in it. And I remember him getting sort of upset and frustrated with that because in his mind, this was part of what he was picturing as the father son experience, right? And like one of the things I talk about in the book is that my dad basically did not have a father. Like he his father went through 5 different marriages, right? And was like not there for my dad's childhood at all, basically. And so effectively as the child of a single mom, my dad really didn't have that stable father figure in his life. And so one of the things we've sort of unpacked over the course of our relationship is so much of those early years and so much of the sort of tension and frustration he felt was he was trying to recreate this vision of fatherhood and this vision of the father son relationship that mostly came from the media, right? And came from other people's, recollection and description of it. Because that was all he had, right? Like he didn't have this lived experience to draw from, which might have given him, I mean, could have done any number of things, right? I mean, sometimes having that experience only makes people more committed to like recreate that exact thing. Um, and in fact, that's one of the things I will wrestle with as a father is I did have a very loving, stable, present dad, right? Like my dad was there for me. My dad, I mean, we had so many wonderful, he's still like one of my best friends. And so one of the things I think about a lot myself, and I should be writing this down, um, is me feeling the temptation to recreate my father son experience, right? Because that's the thing. Like if I think of the things that I most cherish between my dad and I, and the things that were such crucial turning points, things like that story. And there's another story, a very similar story that comes up in the book where he and I went to see a play together. I'm pretty sure this is after that night with the parking brake. Um, but we went and saw this play called The Rabbit Hole, and as we were driving home from the play, my dad broke down sobbing in the car, like just completely wrecked. And I'd never seen that from him before. But the reason why, which we talked about on the ride home, was that um, he lost his brother in his early 20s, and the play was about grief, right? And specifically about parents who'd lost their child at a much younger age, and then the mother in the play had also lost her son, the main woman's brother, when he was in his 20s. And it was that character's monologue that just pierced my dad to the core, right? Because it was like looking in a mirror for him, like the way she was describing grief and what it's like to carry, to lose someone at that age and then to carry it for like decades later. And it does get easier and it does get better in some ways, but it's always there. And when as we had that conversation, I saw my dad in a totally new light, and I had so much more patience for him and so much more respect for him, and, um, I felt such a deeper connection with him because, suddenly all these things that had been a source of tension in our relationship to that point finally made sense. They finally started to click into place, like, not just the fact that he didn't have a father figure, but also the fact that he had gone through such a horrible loss at such a young age gave him this sort of impatience with the small things in life, right? Like, and it's funny because like to this day, my dad, he he doesn't he the things that bother most people. I mean, and he still has his pet peeves, right? But like what ironically one of his pet peeves is when other people get spun out over tiny problems. It's like why would you choose to get upset about that, right? Why would you choose to like lock in and be and to like let this one minor annoyance ruin your entire day when like you've got this one life to live, right? Like and again, that's one of the things I love and appreciate about my dad is he is committed to being happy and to living a life of adventure and fun. And I think in large part because he had that loss early on, right? And it taught him, it shoved in his face that life is precious and it can be gone at any minute. And um and so all of that, right? Like that was my experience with him. That that was a direct product of everything he went through in his life and the specific challenges I came into the world with, right? As someone on the spectrum, someone who another core beat, um, struggling to socialize slash burying myself in video games, which was a huge part of my childhood and teens, early teens, is like I think one of the biggest things that people misunderstand about people on the autism spectrum is that they because we to struggle with socialization and we tend to struggle with the sort of rituals and codes of social interaction like up to and including when to make eye contact, right? Like the funny like you see this all the time with people on the spectrum is that a lot of us either never make eye contact, right? Like you'll be talking to us and like for the entire conversation we're like staring at the wall or staring at the floor, or it's like obsessive unwavering eye contact, like even when you're getting uncomfortable and you really and you're like, okay, that's good. You can look away now. It's like we just keep staring at you. Like it's all these little things that create friction in social interactions, and people assume it's because we don't care or we don't want to connect with other people or we're not trying earnestly to do so. And the thing that I know from experience and like the thing that has been such a sort of guiding principle in my life is like no, I love other people. I do want to connect with other people. I made it my profession to connect with other people. I got into I you know I went through theater, right? Like we've been talking about. I got into copywriting, I got into marketing. I built an entire career that requires me to go out and connect with other people, whether that's through my writing or oftentimes through direct interaction. And in many ways, it's because I didn't come with that stuff factory installed that I had to learn it and I had to become great at it. I had to master being able to have a good conversation, right? Um, which made this kind of related note. The art of conversation. Um, which is something my dad taught me, and my dad was really good at. Like one of the things that my dad said all throughout my childhood that like always stuck with me, and has become one of my core principles is like most people think they're having a conversation, but they're not. What they're really doing is having dueling monologues, right? one person says the thing they want to say, and then they wait until the other person stops talking without really listening so that then they can continue saying the thing they want to say, right? And the thing is, neurotypical people do this too all the time, right? I mean, certainly, like when people on the spectrum do it, when I do it, it's it's usually just out of sheer passion and obsessive focus over the thing that I want to share, right? Like in my and in fact, like it, I often joke with people. It's like in the same way that like a cat will go outside and bring you a dead rodent to show that it cares about you and wants you to eat. Um, I bring fun facts, right? Like I bring whatever I'm obsessed with, and I will tell you why it's special at great detail and at great length because I care, right? Like that's my way of showing love. Like I'm getting so much joy out of this thing, and I want you to have it too. Now, the danger there is that if you're not actually interested, and if I'm not stopping to read the social cues that you're giving off that show me that you're bored, right? Then that creates friction, right? That makes that makes me a rough hang, right? And I used to be a really rough hang as a kid. But what I learned is how to observe, slow down, observe, pause, and see where the other person is at. Are they leaning in? Are they interested? If they are, great. And you know what? Let me see why they're interested, right? Let me stop and ask, like, okay, what did you like about that? Right? Or like, what does that spark for you? What's coming up for you right now? And crucially, listen, right? When they start talking, listen to see what they have to say. What's interesting about them, right? Where can I ask questions about their interests and get them talking? And again, the fact that my dad knew he was on the spectrum and understood on some level that this was something that had to be explained, right? Um, in fact, knowing what has to be explained is a core beat. Um, was so crucial to my development and such a gift, right? That like I had a father who would actually stop and explain these things versus most of the rest of the world, which would just sort of look at me like I was broken, right? Or like, oh, he's just a weird kid. Oh, like again, like there's just something wrong with him. That he doesn't want to connect with people seemingly, or he's cold or he's distant. And like, um, and if anything, like that at times became its own self-fulfilling prophecy. Like because people were treating me that way, especially as a teenager, there were times where I was prickly and angry and standoffish because I felt misunderstood. Right? I was afraid. I was putting up a defense to keep people away because I didn't trust them. I didn't believe that they would actually like learn to appreciate me if I let my guard down and was myself around them because that seemingly was the thing that was a problem. Um, and so when I think about that in terms of how it connects back to my dad and my son, like here's the thing. There I might even like go and dig this up for the when I'm actually writing the article, but it's really like what there's another big thing people misunderstand about autism. Autism is we still don't 100% know where it comes from. Like we do understand that there's a genetic component of it, but the thing that is tricky is that it's if it were just like the fact that you can pass it on generationally, but that it's not 100%, right? Um, is I think a crucial thing to remember because and because it is I'm not gonna I don't want to like speak out of turn here because I forget the exact mechanism for this. I know it has something to do with like the X and Y chromosomes, but um but basically because of the genetic mechanism of how it passes on, if a male parent is on the spectrum and they have a male child, it's like an 80% chance that it'll be passed on. And then every other combination, so like male parent to female parent, I think is like or male parent to female child, I think is like maybe 60%, or might even like already be dropping down to 40. Female parent, way less likely to pass it on. Um, and even then, like female parent to male child is more likely than female parent to female child. Like basically, female to female is the least likely. Male to male is the most likely, right? So knowing that, and knowing that we've got a little boy, um, that's something I've been thinking about a lot, right? Like, basically from the day we found out that he's going to be a boy. And the funny thing is, like part of how speech delay, right? This is a big topic. Um, Part of how I got diagnosed was I had delayed speech as a toddler. Like I was well into my twos before I said I had any words at all. And that's one of the key indicators, right? That's like usually like the first sign that parents get. They're like, oh, right, we might got a little baby on the spectrum here. And so that's when my parents, started. In fact, it was literally like I think they were at the pediatrician, and the pediatrician is the one that said, "Hey, how many words does he know yet?" And they were like, "None." And then he was like, "Oh, oh, right." So then they took me to a specialist, and started going through the process, and even then, like I actually just learned this recently, by chatting with dad, is that they I didn't get diagnosed at 2, but they said it was likely, right? And the reason for that is, I think this is actually still true to this day, um, is they actually will not. I mean, if they're responsible, right, they won't diagnose a 2-year-old because it's too early, right? Like it could be that you have a neurotypical child that just has a different development path than others, right? Um, so that's why they don't want to like necessarily like box you in that way that early. But by the time I was six, 6 or 8, somewhere in that range, I did get a formal diagnosis because sure enough, the behaviors continued to line up, and they kept taking me in, and then sure enough, yeah, there we go. So welcome, Stephanie. Um, uh, and so with that in mind, I was fully ready for our son to have a speech delay like I did, right? He's now almost 2.5, and he's picked up all kinds of words, right? Like, I mean, he's probably somewhere around 100 words by now, and like picks up phrases. He's saying like whole sentences now. Like his speech development's fantastic. He's crushing it. And so already that's something where I'm like, huh, here I was preparing mentally for his development to look one way because that's what it looked like for me. And already that's not lining up. Already he's clearly got his own path, which of course he does. He's his own person, right? And I think this comes back to the real central question of the essay, which is going to be, how do we honor the differences between generations and still pass on what we've learned? Because that's the thing. I know that everything my dad went through, not just in terms of autism, in terms of everything we've been talking about, right? Losing his brother, grief, everything. His That shaped his ability to father me and gave me so many gifts in terms of the conversations we were able to have and the things he was able to explain to me, and not even just like what he said, but who he was, right? Who he is. Like the example of how to move through life that I get from him is so precious, and there's so much in there I want to pass on to my son because it's so precious to me. But the thing about that next step of the transmission is I can't assume that my son is going to have the same needs and the same challenges that I had. That's already not true. He already has a different set of needs and challenges than I do. And that doesn't mean that I can't pass on the things that are so great about my dad and the things that I think are great about me. But it means I have to stay on my toes and be very thoughtful about who is this kid, right? Like who is he really? Not just like what are the parts of me that I see in him, but who is he as his own person? Like with his own unique essence and with his own experiences in life. How do I bridge that gap? How do I translate to that person and not just fight to recreate the things that happened in the past? And that I think a lot of people can relate to. I think basically anyone can relate to that. Even if you're not a parent, even if you're just in, if you're a teacher or if you're someone's cool aunt or cool uncle, right? If you have just some other connection to the next generation and you're invested in their future, that's the question that matters to everyone. We all have some version of that question we're wrestling with, and that's what makes it a good central question. And that's what makes it something that doesn't limit this article to only talking about autism. I am going to be talking about autism. I'm going to use that as the lens to explore this deeper question. But ultimately, it's not only for people who are looking for that, right? It's something for them, absolutely, and then even more, right? Something they can share with others, and something that will radiate out to an even bigger audience. Um, and that's it. That this is why I outline things. Right? This is the thing I am hoping to achieve with every single Substack article I write is like I want to find this thing. I want to find a central question that has that chance of radiating out. And it's a constant balancing act. Some days I think I do it better than others, but that's always the goal. That's always the intention. Is how can I find the thing that radiates on a universal level. Also, welcome, Todd. Good to see you again. Um, so I know you guys just like both jumped in kind of late, but basically, yeah. And you'll be able to catch the recording later on YouTube if you want. But yeah, this has been me outlining my next Substack article. And really, the main thing was getting down to the central question, which is to recap a little bit from before you joined. That's one of the core things I learned from my screenwriting coach back in the day was every great story has a universal central question at its core. And the reason why it's a central question instead of a central statement is that you don't want to be preachy, right? And certainly here, like, I'm not trying to preach anything about autism or fatherhood or whatever else. Like, I don't have the final answers for any of that. I'm not trying to have the final answers. What I'm saying is that this is my experience. Now it's your turn, right? Take what I've shared and use that to reflect on your own life and come to your own conclusions. That's always the goal. And that's far more interesting, I think, than trying to like stand on the mountaintop and preach. And actually, by that same token, I'm debating now if I want to like if I want to like start like because the next step is really, I mean, the next step, which is kind of the easy part now, is putting these in the right order, right? Because I've got this sort of loose pile of beats, but in fact, the one I think is probably the opening beat is this. So this is like it's so funny. I can't even remember the exact context for it. I mean, I this was at the hospital when our son was like right before and then right after he was delivered. Um, my dad and my sister were there, and going in and out with us, and um, and my dad just kept like cracking these random jokes about this or that thing skipping a generation, right? Like, oh, I guess that skipped a generation, and it's funny because like now we this might be a thing that skips a generation, right? Um, or at least it might be something that looks very different across generations, and I think that's a fun way to tee up that idea. And I like the kind of playfulness of it, right? Like, here's my dad cracking jokes, um, but also that is a very deep question, right? Um, and I and it's one that can be kind of heavy um, and difficult, but like this allows us to like have a fun way of getting into it. Um, I had one other thought on that too. Something about while we were in the hospital. Uh, well, I mean, the thing I wanted to touch on in general, and this should go on the list too. Um, every so even within a single family line, every instance of autism is can be very different. Like, going back to what I was saying earlier about this part playing catch, not wanting to play catch with my dad. So um, off a lot of folks on the spectrum, me included, um, are not great with hand-eye coordination, right? Like, I and there are certain areas where I've learned to be good at it. Like I figured out how to manage it well, but certainly I'm not like you look at people who are like natural athletes, not in the physique sense, but in terms of like the way their brains work, right? And they just have this like uncanny ability to like catch things and just as like command of their body. Not me, right? I was born with the furthest opposite of that, and yet my dad um has never really had that problem, right? Like to this my knowledge. I mean, I'll ask him again to double check, but like um like he played sports. He wasn't like professional or anything, but like he's got pretty solid hand eye coordination, and even like it's funny. There's a certain kind of autistic clumsiness where like people call it the like the autistic lean, where and I do this all the time, where if you're like walking um through an office, for example, neurotypical people have this kind of like default sense of like how to like navigate around. Like I'm looking at the corner of my desk right now. A lot of neurotypical people when they have to walk around a corner like that, they just have this natural sense of like how to give it enough space so that they're not bumping into it, right? Unless they're distracted or something else is going on. But for me, the thing I do, like I'll go walking around this corner and like my body is like centimeters away from the edge of the desk, and so I have to like lean and contort myself mid step to make sure I don't hit it because I do actually notice it at the last second, and so it's like I'm doing this like weird little bob and weave motions everywhere I go. And again, that's super common, right? A lot of people on the spectrum have this. And but I've never seen that with my dad, right? Like my dad, like when he is moving around the space, for lack of a better word, he looks normal, right? He's not doing the weird little duck and leans that me and my sister do, for the record. Um and so, but one of the things that we do have in common um is a lot of the socialization stuff, right? Like my dad, and I think my dad maybe had a little bit easier of a time with it, but there's still certain ways where like if you watch us in conversation, um, the way we sort of like lock into things and sort of plow through certain social niceties, right? And like don't like though we, like neither of us really bother with small talk. Again, that's a spectrum thing. Like that because our brains are not wired to want to go through those steps that neurotypical people do, we just don't. And we've learned to work with that, right? And like there in some ways I think that's actually a strength. But but yeah, so like even just between the two of us, there are certain things that are very common spectrum traits that we both have pretty much identical. There are certain things I have that he doesn't, and vice versa. And now it looks like with my son, if he even is on the spectrum, which it's possible that he's not, even if he is, it'll manifest differently, right? It's not going to look like an exact carbon copy of me or my dad. Um, so let me see. I'm just thinking about. So this probably goes up here. Oh, these would go up here. Just so, I mean, it's kind of was already there just from me riffing, but now I'm looking at it in terms of like, okay, like how do these ideas stack on top of each other, right? And how do these build towards some sort of answer to the central question? And when I say answer, I mean that in a very soft sense, like what, not like here's here's the button, right? But like here's the direction I'm rowing in. Um, yeah, honestly, like there's more to flesh out here. There's definitely more I could piece together, but this honestly isn't like I could probably go and write this article now. I'm not going to because I have a call right after this. Um, but yeah, this is it. This is how I outline. Um, for certain things, I go into a lot more detail than this, but for a 1,000 word ish article, this is great. It's an awesome start. Um, so like I said, I do have a call like right about now, but thank you guys for hopping on. Even at the very tail end. Hopefully, you were able to get something out of just that last little nugget. And otherwise, I'll see you guys next time. And be sure to go back and catch the full recording, which will go up on YouTube and I think Substack too. Holds on to the lives after they're done, so you can go see the first half of all this. But like I said, thank you guys as always for joining, and I'll be back same time, same place next week for something else. Bye, everybody.